He had built an empire on fear, 37 years of controlling everyone and everything, until the elevator doors opened and a woman walked in carrying frosting-covered hands, broken heels, and absolutely zero awareness of who he was. Dante Moretti had never lost control of a room in his life. She made him lose it in 11 seconds. If you're watching this story for the first time, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because this is only the beginning. Bob. The morning Dante Moretti turned 37, nobody said a word about it. Not his assistant, Marcus, who had been with him for 9 years, and still could not tell when the man was in a dangerous mood versus a catastrophic one, because the difference between the two was almost entirely invisible. Not his driver, who picked him up at 5:40 in the morning in silence, the way he always did. The partition between the front and back seat already raised before the car left the underground garage. Not the building security on the ground floor of Moretti Tower, who straightened their spines the moment they heard his elevator code engage and stared straight ahead as if looking at him directly might somehow invite consequence. Nobody said a word because Dante Moretti did not have birthdays. He had dates on a calendar that continued moving without his permission. He stepped into the private elevator at 6:03, the kind of elevator most people in the building did not know existed, recessed behind a keypad panel in the east lobby, accessible only to 3 people in the entire 47-story building. The interior was matte black and chrome, and the floor was real Calicut marble, cold and pale as bone. Dante straightened his cufflinks as the doors slid shut. Or they should have. What happened instead was a hand, a single arm, half buried under a massive stack of white bakery boxes, shot through the gap between the closing doors with the absolute confidence of someone who had never once in their life considered what might be on the other side of a closing elevator. The doors retracted. Automatic sensors, not mercy. She came in the way a small storm comes in, all compressed energy and forward motion, the boxes stacked from her waist to somewhere above her eyeline, so she couldn't actually see where she was going. She was navigating by memory or instinct or sheer refusal to slow down, and she made it 2 full steps inside before her left heel caught the seam between the lobby tile and the marble floor. The tilt happened fast. The boxes went faster. Dante moved without thinking. His right arm shot out and his hand closed around her waist. Not gently, not carefully, just firmly, the way you catch something falling because your body reacts before your brain approves the action. The boxes hit the marble anyway. The top 3 popped their lids and something pale yellow and flecked with vanilla scattered across a $500 per square foot floor. The woman gasped, caught her balance, straightened. Then she looked up at him. She was not what the elevator was built for. She was 29, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a knot that had been losing the battle against gravity for what looked like several hours. There was a smear of white frosting on her left forearm and a faint streak of cocoa powder along her collarbone, just above the neckline of her jacket. Her shoes were block heels, the left one visibly cracked along the outer edge. Her face was not beautiful in the way Dante's world used that word, which was always a calculation, always a currency, but the kind of face that moved, that shifted, that showed every single thing happening inside the person wearing it, without permission and without apology. She was in that first second visibly mortified. "Oh no," she breathed. And then, because apparently mortification had layers, "Oh no, no, no." She dropped to her knees on the marble and started gathering the fallen boxes, her hands moving fast, checking lids, pressing corners back into alignment. Dante had not moved. His arm was still extended from where he had caught her, hanging slightly in the air, and he became aware of that slowly, the way you become aware of something wrong with your own body only after the danger has passed. He lowered his arm. "You're in the private elevator," he said. She didn't look up. "I know. The woman at the front desk said the service elevator was out and that I could use the East Corridor one because I had a delivery to 41. She got 2 boxes stacked, reached for the 3rd. Mr. Hargrove's assistant confirmed it. Dante stood there. Hargrove was his head of finance, and the man had, in fact, Recently switched the office catering contract to some small local operation. He had mentioned it in passing. Dante had not absorbed the details because he did not generally absorb details about cupcakes. "The frosting," he said. She finally looked up. Her eyes were dark brown and very direct, and for the half second before self-consciousness caught up with her, they met his without flinching. Most people flinched. Most people looked slightly to the left of his face when they spoke to him, as if direct eye contact carried some kind of risk they couldn't afford. She looked straight at him, then at the marble floor, then back at him. "I'll clean it," she said, already reaching into her jacket pocket. She came out with a folded paper towel, a single, slightly crumpled paper towel that she clearly kept on her person as a matter of professional habit, and pressed it against the largest smear of frosting on the floor. Dante watched her kneel on a marble floor in a cracked shoe and blot frosting with a paper towel, like the building was somehow her responsibility to fix. "That won't work," he said. "I know," she said, "but it's better than leaving it." She got the boxes restacked, stood up, adjusted her grip, redistributed the weight, and for the first time seemed to fully register that she was standing in a very small space with a man she had not yet looked at long enough to identify. She glanced at him again, at his suit, at the building security badge that wasn't on his chest because he didn't wear one, at the absence of a visitor pass, at the keypad he'd used to call the elevator, and did the math. Her chin went up slightly. Not arrogance. Something else. Like she was deciding in real time whether this situation required apology or simply endurance. "I'm going to 41, she said. "I'll get out of your way." "You're already in my elevator," Dante said. "It only goes up." She processed this. The doors were closed. The elevator had not moved because he had not entered his floor code yet. "I'm Ruby," she said. "Castellano. Sweet Haven Bakery." Not extending a hand because her hands were full, just stating it plainly, the way people who are used to showing up in places where they have to prove they belong learn to lead with their name. Dante looked at her for a moment that lasted slightly longer than it should have. "Moretti," he said. Something shifted in her expression. Not fear, which is what he was used to, the quiet recalibration he saw in most people's faces when the name landed. It was something more like recognition, followed immediately by a very controlled neutrality that she pulled over herself like a shade going down. "The building Moretti," she said. "Yes?" She nodded once, the way you nod when you've said something you already knew and simply needed to confirm. "I'm sorry about the floor." "The floor has survived worse," Dante said, and reached past her to enter the code. The elevator moved. They stood in the kind of silence that is not actually silence because both people in it are too aware of their own breathing. She stared at the doors. He looked at the display above them. The vanilla smell was strong, not artificial, not synthetic, actually vanilla, warm and faint and completely out of place in everything Dante had built the last 2 decades to surround himself with. He did not look at her again. He exited at 44, 3 floors above where she was going, because that was where his private floor began. The doors opened and he stepped off without turning back. He heard her shift the boxes in her arms as the doors slid shut behind him. Marcus was already waiting in the corridor with a tablet and a look of precisely calibrated professionalism that meant 3 things had gone wrong before 7 a.m. "Talk," Dante said. "Kynes people moved on the warehouse on Linden overnight. We lost 4 containers." Dante walked. Marcus matched his pace. "How?" "They had someone inside, warehouse manager. We found out this morning." "Where is he now?" "Secured. Waiting on your instruction." "And the containers?" "Gone. Electronics mostly. The manifest was altered before the shipment left port." Marcus paused. "Victor Kane is making a statement." Dante pushed through the glass doors to his floor and did not stop walking until he reached the windows that looked out over the city, 44 stories of space between him and the street below. The city was steel and gray and movement and fog this time of morning, and it had no opinion about what happened inside it. It never did. He had known Victor Kane for 16 years. They had once been positioned as allies, heirs to adjacent empires, overlapping territories that could benefit from cooperation. That lasted 2 years before Dante understood that Victor did not want cooperation. He wanted precedence. He wanted to be the largest thing in the room, and any room that contained Dante Moretti as an equal was a room Victor could not tolerate. The deterioration between them had been slow and then sudden, the way important things always collapse, by degrees that seem manageable until they aren't. Now it was open. Now it was a language both of them understood. "Tell him to be available at noon," Dante said. The warehouse manager. "Yes," Marcus wrote. Did not ask what noon meant. He already knew. "Anything else?" Dante asked. "Hargrove wants to confirm the quarterly review for Thursday." "Fine." And building management flagged a minor damage report from the east elevator. Marcus scrolled. "Frosting residue on the Calicotta floor. Maintenance is handling it." Dante said nothing. "Should I note the source of the delivery for future access restrictions?" Dante turned from the window. He looked at Marcus, who was watching him with the precise blankness of a man who had learned when to stop offering information and when to simply hold the tablet and wait. "No," Dante said. "Leave it." Marcus wrote nothing. His expression did not change. Dante walked to his desk. He spent the next 11 hours doing what he always did, making the kinds of decisions that did not exist in any legal record, managing the kind of relationships that were never formalized with a handshake, controlling the city through mechanisms that the city mostly did not want to know about. He was efficient. He was cold. He did not raise his voice once, which his people understood was more dangerous than if he had. At 7 in the evening, Marcus brought him a coffee and set it on the desk without being asked. Dante was reading a document, pen in hand, and did not look up. "The delivery woman from this morning," he said. Not as a question. Marcus had learned to keep certain things ready. "Ruby Castellano, 29. Owner and head baker at Sweet Haven on West 34th, over on the edge of Meridian District. Been open 4 years. Hargrove's assistant contracted them for office catering last month. No record. No history." A pause. "Clean." Dante wrote a note in the margin of his document. "That's all." Marcus left. Dante did not think about her again that night. He told himself that clearly, directly, the way he gave instructions, and his brain accepted it, because his brain had been disciplined for 2 decades to accept his instructions. He finished the document. He ate alone. He went to bed in the penthouse 47 stories above a city that feared him, in a bedroom that contained nothing soft. He did not think about vanilla, or dark eyes that did not flinch, or the way she had said his name, the building Moretti, with that quiet acknowledgement that she knew exactly where she had landed and was choosing deliberately not to be afraid. He did not think about any of that. He was exceptionally good at not thinking about things. 4 days later, he was on the ground floor at 11:15 in the morning when the east lobby door opened and she came in again. Different shoes this time, same jacket, 2 boxes instead of 10, one balanced on each forearm, and her hair was down, which made her look different. Softer, maybe. Or just more like a person who existed outside of a single moment in an elevator. She was already at the front desk before she saw him, and when she did, she went still for exactly the length of time it takes someone to decide not to react. "Mr. Moretti," she said. He had been standing there talking to building security about the Linden situation, which was not the kind of conversation that should be interrupted by a pastry chef. And yet. "Delivery?" he asked. "Weekly now," she said. "Thursday assortments for 41. He nodded. She went to the elevator. He watched her go. She didn't look back, which he registered the way you register any unusual thing, simply without assigning it meaning. He turned back to the security manager and resumed the conversation. But something was already different, and Dante could not have named it yet. And perhaps that was the first warning he should have paid more attention to. The fact that for the first time in longer than he could honestly track, a person had walked out of his line of sight, and he had noticed the absence. The security manager was still talking. Dante heard none of it. The following Thursday, he was on the ground floor again. He told himself it was coincidental. He had a meeting on 12 that started at noon, and he left his floor early because the east stairwell offered a faster route and the building logistics made sense. She came in at 11:18. He was standing by the window that faced west, not the door, but he saw her in the reflection. She saw him too this time, immediately. Recognized his silhouette even from across the lobby, which said something, he thought, about the kind of attention she was paying even when she pretended she wasn't. She walked directly to the front desk, signed in, collected the elevator code from the attendant who had been briefed to provide it. She passed him on the way to the elevator. "Mr. Moretti," she said, without slowing. "Miss Castellano," he said. She stopped, turned, looked at him with the same directness as the first time, that same quality of seeing the whole room, including the parts people generally preferred to leave unexamined. "You keep knowing my name," she said. "That's a little unsettling." "It's my building," he said. "Right." She adjusted her grip on the boxes. "Well, have a good Thursday." She went to the elevator. Dante went to his meeting. He was 12 minutes late, which had not happened in 4 years, and Marcus noted it on his tablet with the expression of a man who was writing very carefully around a question he did not yet have the information to ask. By the 5th Thursday, Dante was not pretending it was coincidental anymore. He was simply there, and she was there. And they had developed the kind of exchange that did not have a name because neither of them had said enough to give it one. She told him once that the elevator smelled like his cologne for an hour after he used it, which he reported neutrally, as information, not complaint or flirtation. He told her once that the frosting she'd left on his floor in January had been discussed at a building maintenance meeting, which was true. She had laughed, actually laughed, surprised and open, and it was the loudest sound he could remember a person making in this building in years. It was on the 6th Thursday that he followed her. Not the way it sounds. He was going to 41 anyway. Hargrove had scheduled a meeting at the insistence of his board, and the timing happened to align. He stepped off the elevator at the same floor, and she was in the middle of setting out boxes on the office kitchen counter, and she glanced at him over her shoulder. "You don't seem like a Thursday meeting kind of man," she said. "What kind of man do I seem like?" She considered it, folding a paper bag and tucking it under her arm. "The kind who schedules meetings and then makes everyone come to them," she said. "Not the kind who goes to someone else's floor for anything." She was right. He was entirely right. He had no plausible reason to be standing in Hargrove's kitchen at 11:20 on a Thursday. "Your bakery," he said. "What time do you open?" She turned fully. Something in her expression shifted. Not calculation, but awareness. She was reading the question for what it was. 8, she said. "Until 6, close Sundays." "What do you recommend," he said, "if someone has never ordered from you before?" She held his gaze for a moment, then, "Come in and find out," she said. "That's usually how it works." She picked up her empty boxes and left. Dante stood in Hargrove's kitchen for 30 seconds after she was gone. He was aware that he had just said something he could not unsay, that he had moved past some internal boundary he had held for a very long time without quite deciding to. The way rivers move around rocks, not by choice, but because the water keeps finding the lowest available path. He left 41. He did not go to Sweet Haven that week or the week after, but on the 3rd week, a Tuesday, when his driver turned onto West 34th without being told to, Dante did not correct him. He stepped into a bakery that smelled of real vanilla, brown sugar, warm yeast, and something indefinable that had everything to do with the fact that the person running it had built it from nothing with their own hands. The space was small. 12 tables, a glass case along the front counter, chalkboard menus, photographs of the city hung slightly crooked along the south wall. It was imperfect the way things are imperfect when the person who built them prioritized warmth over precision. Ruby looked up from behind the counter and went still for exactly 1 second. Then she said evenly, "You came." "You told me to," Dante said. "That was 3 weeks ago." "I had a schedule," he said. She looked at him for a moment with that expression he was beginning to recognize, the one that meant she was deciding again not to be afraid when being afraid might actually be the reasonable choice. Then she turned to the glass case. "All right," she said. "Let me show you what we have." He stayed for 40 minutes. He ordered 4 things and overpaid for all of them, and she pushed the change back across the counter with the same firm composure she brought to everything. And he took it because she clearly expected him to, and he left it as a tip under the coffee cup. On his way out, he stopped at the door. He didn't turn around. "Same time Friday?" he said, behind him without hesitation. "I'll be here," she said. He stepped out onto West 34th and stood on the sidewalk in a city that feared him, in a life that had been built on controlled distance and deliberate isolation. And he was aware, not comfortably, not happily, but fully, that something had just shifted that he was not going to be able to shift back. In the cold afternoon air, a black SUV idled across the street. It had been there when he arrived. It was still there when he left. And the man behind the tinted window, watching Ruby Castellano move behind the glass of her small bakery, was not anyone Dante had brought with him. The SUV did not move. Dante stood on the sidewalk outside Sweet Haven for exactly 4 seconds, long enough to memorize the plate, the angle, the distance, the fact that the driver's side window was cracked 2 inches despite the cold, long enough to understand that this was not surveillance positioned by amateurs. Whoever was in that vehicle had chosen their spot with patience and intention, parked at the precise angle that gave them full sightlines to the bakery entrance, while remaining outside the range of the 2 street cameras mounted on the intersection 30 meters east. Someone had done their geometry before parking there. Dante walked to his car without looking back. Inside, partition already up, he called Marcus before the door was fully closed. Black SUV, West 34th, 40 meters west of the Sweet Haven storefront. Late model, plates ending 77 kilo. I need everything in the next 30 minutes. Already? Marcus said. Don't, Dante said. Marcus didn't. The results came in 22 minutes. The plates were registered to a shell company with 3 layers of paper between it and any name Dante recognized, which was itself a recognizable signature. Victor Kane had a specific way of burying his ownership trails. Always 3 shells, always a property management company at the top, always a registered agent in Delaware. It was consistent the way criminal laziness was consistent. The method that worked once kept getting used until it didn't. Dante sat with the information for a long moment. His hands were flat on the desk. He was breathing through his nose, slow and even, the way he had trained himself to breathe when the thing he was looking at was worse than he expected. Victor had found something. The question was how much he had found and how long he'd been looking. He called his head of security, a man named Reyes, who communicated almost exclusively in short declarative sentences and had never once in 11 years offered an opinion unless asked for one. Ruby Castellano, Dante said, Sweet Haven Bakery, West 34th. I want a perimeter. Discreet. Nothing she can see. I want to know every vehicle that parks on that block for more than 20 minutes. Timeline, Reyes said. Starting tonight. Done. Dante hung up and sat in his office until past midnight, working, not thinking about her, which was becoming a discipline that required more active maintenance than it used to. 2 days later, on a Thursday, Ruby arrived at Moretti Tower with her boxes and her cracked heel replacement shoes, new ones, he noted, black with a low block heel that looked like they'd been chosen for durability rather than anything else, and Dante was not in the lobby when she arrived. He watched the security feed from his floor instead, watched her sign in, exchange a few words with the front desk attendant that involved some laughter he couldn't hear, take the elevator code, disappear into the east corridor. He turned the feed off. He went to 41 at 11:45, which he told himself was because he needed to speak with Hargrove about the Thursday review, which was true, and also because he was passing through, which was less true. Ruby was in the kitchen, packing up her empty boxes, when he came in. Hargrove's assistant looked up and immediately found a reason to be somewhere else, which was a response Dante had never had to train people to have. It came naturally, like startle reflex. Ruby didn't leave. She folded the top of a paper bag and looked at him. You didn't come in Tuesday, she said. I had a conflict. You could have called. I don't have your number. She held his gaze. You run a building. You found out my name, my business address, and my delivery schedule. You're telling me a phone number was the obstacle? He said nothing. She was right, and she knew she was right, and he recognized in her expression that she was not asking this as a complaint. She was asking it as a test, or maybe as a clarification, trying to determine whether what was happening between them in the space of these small Thursday exchanges was something he acknowledged or something he was going to keep pretending had no shape. I should have called, he said. She nodded once, picked up her boxes. The lemon tarts are new this week, she said. If you come in before noon on Friday, they'll still be fresh. I'll be there at 9, he said. She smiled, small, private, like she was trying to keep it contained and not quite managing it, and walked out. He stood in Hargrove's empty kitchen and was aware that he had just made a promise about a lemon tart, as if it were a simple thing, as if the black SUV had not been on West 34th 2 days ago, as if Victor Kahn did not already know exactly what West 34th meant. He went to the bakery Friday at 9, and the Friday after that, and the Tuesday in between. It was on the third Tuesday that they had their first real fight. It started over nothing, which is how real fights always start. He had overpaid again, left 4 times the price of what he ordered, folded under the coffee cup, the way he always did. And she had found it, the way she always did. And this time, instead of pushing the bills back across the counter, she had walked to the door while he was still drinking his coffee, opened it, and held it. Out, she said. He looked at her. I beg your pardon. I've told you 3 times, Ruby said. Her voice was flat and quiet, which he was learning was more serious than if she'd been loud. I'm not a charity. I'm not a project. You pay what the price is or you don't come back. I'm leaving a tip. A tip is 20%. You left $400 for a coffee and 2 croissants. Consider it investment in the business. I don't want your investment. She held the door. The morning cold was coming in around her. You want to invest in something. Find a startup. This is a bakery. I've been running it by myself for 4 years and I don't need anyone to come in and make it feel like a transaction. Dante set down the coffee cup. He looked at her standing in the doorway in her work apron, flowers still on her forearm from whatever she'd been doing before he came in, eyes direct and steady and genuinely angry in the specific way of someone who has said something important before and been ignored. You're serious, he said. I'm always serious, she said. You just keep waiting for me to be joking. He picked up the bills from under the cup, took out the correct amount, $14, which he did not actually have in small bills, so he put a 20 on the counter. Keep the change, he said. That's a $6 tip, she said. That's 43%, he said. Acceptable? She considered it, stepped back from the door, let it close. Acceptable, she said, and went back behind the counter. He finished his coffee. He ordered a lemon tart. He paid exactly the listed price plus 43%, and she counted it, nodded, and did not say another word about it. But when he stood to leave, she said, without looking up from the tray she was arranging, Same time Thursday? I'll be here, he said. He meant it, and he hated that he meant it. And he walked out into West 34th knowing that Reyes had 2 people on the block and that the black SUV had not come back, but that this meant almost nothing because Victor Kane did not repeat his moves. The photograph arrived on a Wednesday. No message, no sender name. Just an image file forwarded through 4 proxies to a secure email address that only 12 people in the city knew existed. The photograph was taken with a long lens. The grain and compression were consistent with something shot from at least 200 meters. And it showed Ruby standing outside Sweet Haven in her work coat, door key in hand, about to lock up for the night. She was alone. She was looking at her phone. The angle was from above and slightly east, which meant the photographer had been elevated. A window, a fire escape, a rooftop. Close enough to read the expression on her face. Dante looked at the photograph for a long time. Long enough to register every detail he had not intended to register. The way she was standing with her weight on her left foot, slightly tired, the day behind her. The small paper bag she was carrying, probably leftovers from the case. The fact that she was smiling at whatever was on her phone. He closed the image. He called Marcus. Get me a meeting with Victor Kane. Marcus paused, just briefly. When? Tomorrow, Dante said. His location, his terms. I'll come to him. Another pause. Longer. Dante? Set it up. He hung up. He did not sleep that night. He sat in the dark of the penthouse with the lights off and the city laid out 47 stories below him, all that distance between his life and everything that could be lost in it, and he was brutally honest with himself in the way he had always been capable of being when there was no one else in the room to perform certainty for. He had made a mistake, not by going to the bakery, not by talking to her, not by any single decision he could point to and correct. The mistake had been earlier than that, quieter, more interior. The mistake was that somewhere in the accumulation of 11-minute elevator rides and lemon tarts and $6 tips and arguments about change, he had stopped maintaining the wall with both hands. He had let something in, and now Victor knew it. The meeting happened at 10 the next morning in the back room of a restaurant in the garment district that Victor had been using as a legitimate front for 11 years. Dante came alone, which was the arrangement, which both of them understood meant each had brought people who were waiting outside and not discussing it. The room was narrow, low-ceilinged, smelled of old wood and coffee, and something underneath both that was harder to name. Victor Kane was already seated when Dante came in. Victor was 51, lean in the specific way of men who had survived on vigilance for decades, with silver hair cut close to his skull and eyes that moved independently of his face, always scanning, always calculating, while the face itself stayed completely neutral. He was not a large man, which had caused a lot of people over the years to underestimate what he was capable of, and he had never once bothered to correct the misperception because the gap between what people expected and what he delivered was, itself, a weapon. He gestured to the chair across from him without standing. "You came," he said. "I was curious if you would." Dante sat, did not take off his coat. "The photograph," he said. Victor's expression did not change. "Just a photograph." "What do you want?" Victor poured coffee from the pot on the table. Didn't offer any. "I want to understand something," he said. "A man like you, controlled, careful, no attachments in 20 years, suddenly starts spending Tuesday mornings in a bakery on West 34th. He set the pot down. "I'm curious what changed." "Nothing changed," Dante said. Victor looked at him. "She's pretty," he said, pleasantly, the way you discuss something inconsequential. "In a very ordinary way, not your usual type, if you have a type, which I suppose you don't." He drank his coffee. "It's the ordinary part that's interesting. She has no idea what she's near, does she? This conversation is going somewhere," Dante said. "Get there." "I want the Westport terminals," Victor said. "The 3 parcels on the north dock that your people took over when Garza went down in March. The container infrastructure, the offload contracts. I want the terms renegotiated in my favor by the end of the quarter." Dante said nothing. "I think that's reasonable," Victor said, "given the circumstances. The Westport terminals are worth $40 million in annual throughput." "Yes," Victor said, "they are." The silence in the room was the kind that has weight. Dante looked at Victor Kane across the table and understood completely what was happening and had understood it from the moment the photograph arrived, and the understanding was cold and clear and arrived without the complication of surprise because he had always known, that this was what allowing himself to want something would cost. "You're threatening a civilian," Dante said. "I'm simply sharing information," Victor said. "I know a great deal about Miss Castellano. Where she lives, when she opens the bakery, when she walks home." He paused. "She always walks home. Did you know that? West 34th to the Meridian Apartments, 17 minutes, same route every night. Very consistent woman." He set down his cup. "I appreciate consistency. Makes planning easier." Dante's hands were flat on the table. He was very still, the kind of stillness that is not calm but its opposite. Everything pulled inward, compressed, the way pressure builds before something breaks. "I'll need 2 weeks," Dante said. Victor raised an eyebrow. 4? "The paperwork on the terminal transfer is distributed across 4 entities. 2 weeks to consolidate without flagging a regulatory review that neither of us wants." Victor studied him, looking for the angle, because Victor always looked for the angle. 2 weeks, he said. And Ms. Castellano continues her pleasant routine without interruption. "Yes," Dante said. Victor nodded, satisfied, in the way of a man who has just confirmed something he suspected. He reached into his jacket and set a second photograph on the table. This one showed Ruby at a table near the window of her own bakery, laughing at something a customer had said, completely unaware of the long lens trained on her from across the street. "She seems happy," Victor said. Dante stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Victor Kane across the table with the kind of expression that most people in his life had spent years learning to correctly identify. Not anger, which was manageable, but the specific flatness of a man who has made a decision and is now simply waiting for the timeline to advance. "You'll have the paperwork in 2 weeks," Dante said. He walked out. In the car, Partition up, Marcus in the front passenger seat with his tablet, Dante said nothing for 4 full blocks. Marcus did not fill the silence. He had worked for Dante long enough to know that the silences after meetings with Victor Kane were not silences you filled. "Cancel my Thursday," Dante said finally. Marcus wrote it down. "The Hargrove review or all of it," Dante said. "Everything Thursday." Marcus wrote it down without inflection. "And the Castellano standing entry authorization?" Dante looked out the window at the city moving past. The city did not know about the photograph or the Westport terminals or the fact that a woman who walked home the same route every night had just become the most dangerous thing in his life because she was the only person he had allowed to matter in 20 years. "Leave it," he said. And then, "For now." That night, he did not go to the bakery. He did not call Marcus. He sat at his desk with the lights of the city below him and made a different kind of calculation than the ones he usually made. Not logistics, not leverage, not the kind of controlled assessment that had built the empire around him stone by stone for 2 decades. This calculation was personal, which was exactly the kind he had sworn he would never make again. And it kept producing the same result no matter how many times he ran it. Victor Kane did not make threats and walk away from them. The photograph was a message. I can reach her whenever I decide to. Which meant 2 weeks was not a negotiation. 2 weeks was a window. And what Dante did inside that window would determine whether Ruby Castellano ever found out she had been in danger, or whether she found out in a way that could not be undone. He picked up his phone, set it down, picked it up again. He did not call her. What he did instead was call Reyes and give him 3 additional names and expand the perimeter and add a second shift, and then sit back in his chair with the full weight of what he had built pressing down on him from every direction, and understand with complete clarity that the thing he had spent 20 years trying to prevent had already happened. He had let someone into a life that was not safe for anyone who entered it, and now the only question was whether he could keep her from paying the price for his failure of discipline. The following Thursday morning, Ruby arrived at Moretti Tower at 11:15. Dante was not in the lobby. She signed in, took the elevator code, went to 41, set out the Thursday boxes the way she always did, folded the bags, exchanged 6 sentences with Hargrove's assistant about the weather and the new salted caramel order for next week, took the elevator back down. He was not in the lobby when she came down either. She stood at the front desk for a moment, returning the visitor badge, and the desk attendant, who had been briefed to say nothing, said nothing. Ruby looked once toward the east corridor, the direction of the private elevator, and then looked away. She walked out onto West 34th. She pulled her coat closed and started walking east, the direction of the Meridian Apartments, the same route she always took, and she didn't look back at the building, and she didn't know about the 2 men who stepped out of a parked car 40 meters behind her and began walking the same direction at a distance that was designed to be invisible. She didn't know about any of it. That was the point. That was the only thing Dante could still control, what she knew. But 3 blocks east of Moretti Tower, Ruby stopped at a crosswalk and took out her phone, and she stood there in the cold with her empty bakery bags and typed out a message that arrived on Dante's phone 11 seconds later. He read it at his desk. It said, "You missed Thursday. You should have told me if something changed." He held the phone. He did not type back. He set the phone face down on the desk, and the city was very quiet 47 stories below, and somewhere 3 blocks from his building, Ruby Castellano was waiting at a crosswalk for a light to change, and Dante Moretti sat with the weight of every choice that had brought him to this moment, and understood, for the first time in a very long time, that he was not actually in control of anything. The light changed. She crossed the street, and the man in the dark coat who had been standing in the doorway of the bodega on the corner, not one of Reyes's men, too still, wrong shoes, hands too deliberate in his pockets, turned and watched her go. Reyes called at 11:47 that same night. Dante picked up on the first ring because he had not been sleeping, had not even been close to sleeping, had been sitting at his desk with the city below him and a glass of water he hadn't touched, and the face-down phone that had Ruby's unanswered message on it, waiting for exactly this kind of call without knowing it was coming. "The man on the corner," Reyes said. "We ran him. And he's not Kynes." Dante was very still. "Say that again." "He's not Victor Kane's man." I have two people who know every face on Kane's current payroll. This one doesn't match. We pulled him off a secondary database. He did 18 months in Danbury on a federal wire charge 6 years ago. His known associates don't connect to Kane's network at any point we can identify. Reyes paused, which was unusual because Reyes did not pause. He connects to Aldrich Stern. The name arrived in Dante's chest like something physical. Aldrich Stern was not a name that existed in the same category as Victor Kane. Victor was a rival, known, mapped, understood. Victor operated within a set of rules that were brutal but legible. Aldrich Stern was something else. Stern had come up through the Eastern Port trade 15 years ago and built an operation that didn't have the structure of an empire because it wasn't interested in empire. It was interested in acquisition, the systematic absorption of other people's infrastructure through leverage, blackmail, and the occasional disappearance of whoever stood in the way. He had never once sat across a table from Dante because men like Stern didn't sit across tables. They waited until the table belonged to them. "Why is Stern watching West 34th?" Dante said. "We don't know yet." "Find out." Dante stood up. "Tonight." "There's a second piece," Reyes said. "The shell company on the SUV plates from last week. We went deeper." Another pause. "The third shell layer doesn't connect to Kane either. It connects to a holding company that Stern acquired in a bankruptcy proceeding 14 months ago." Dante walked to the window. The city below was the same city it had always been, and yet it had just reorganized itself into something with a different shape. "Both of them," he said. "It looks that way," Reyes said. "Or they don't know about each other, or one of them is working through the other and neither of us knows the arrangement yet." "Victor sent the photograph," Dante said. Victor made the demand. "Yes. But Stern's people were on the street before that." "At least 10 days before," Reyes said, "based on what we can track." Dante stood at the window for a long moment with the city spread out below him, and the thing he had been treating as a single problem revealing itself as two problems with a shared target, which meant either Stern and Kane had arrived at Ruby Castellano independently, both of them watching, both of them calculating, or someone had pointed them both there. Someone who knew what Ruby meant to Dante before Dante had fully understood it himself. "I need the name of everyone who has accessed my building visitor logs in the last 60 days, Dante said. "That's an internal request," Reyes said carefully. "That's building management systems." "I know what it is. Get it." He hung up. He stood at the window until 2 in the morning, and then he did something he had not done in years. He left the penthouse and drove himself, without Marcus, without a driver, to a part of the city that did not have his name on any building in it. He drove to a street in the South District where a man named Carver operated out of the back of a legitimate printing business, and he knocked on the rear door, and Carver opened it in a bathrobe with a look on his face that said he knew better than to complain about the hour. Carver was not security. He was not muscle. He was the man Dante called when he needed to know something that could not be found through official channels, the kind of intelligence work that required knowing which questions to ask and who had been paid to answer them. He was 63 and had the careful stillness of someone who had spent his entire career in rooms where the wrong word was a serious error. "Aldrich Stern," Dante said inside with the door closed, "and Victor Kane. Any known communication between them in the last 6 months?" Carver poured 2 cups of coffee without being asked and set one in front of Dante and sat down. "That's a large ask." "I know what it is," Dante said. For the second time that night, Carver drank his coffee. "There's a meet," he said, "allegedly, 3rd week of last month. See, I say allegedly because my source is 1 layer removed and I haven't verified. A private dinner, not in the city, venue outside state lines. Guest list, not confirmed. But my source says Kane's name came up in the context of a property discussion." He set the cup down. "Western Port Infrastructure." Dante looked at him. "The Westport terminals," Carver said. "Specifically." Something cold settled into Dante's understanding. Victor Kane had come to him with a demand for the Westport terminals, $40 million in annual throughput, the most significant logistics infrastructure Dante controlled on the eastern seaboard. He had presented it as his own ambition, his own leverage play. But if Stern had been at a dinner discussing Westport 3 weeks before the photograph arrived, Victor doesn't want the terminals, Dante said. It was not a question. That's my read, Carver said. Victor wants the payday for delivering them. Dante sat with this. He was very good at sitting with things that were worse than he expected, because his life had required it of him repeatedly, and he had learned that the impulse to move before the picture was complete was the most expensive mistake a man in his position could make. He sat. He let the full shape of it assemble. Victor Kane was not operating independently. Victor was the front, the face across the table, the man who delivered the demand and made it look like a bilateral conflict between two known rivals. A familiar shape, a legible threat. The kind of negotiation that Dante had navigated dozens of times. Behind Victor was Stern, who wanted the terminals and had found a way to use Victor's existing rivalry with Dante as the mechanism for the acquisition. Pay Victor to be the face. Let Dante think he's dealing with a known quantity. Get the terminals transferred under pressure, with Dante believing he's protecting Ruby from a threat he understands. And Ruby was not the real leverage. She was the discovery that made the leverage possible. Someone had seen Dante going to West 34th and understood what it meant and handed that information to a system that knew exactly how to use it. The visitor logs, Dante said. My building. Carver tilted his head. Something specific? Someone knew about the bakery before I knew it mattered, Dante said. Someone in my organization, or close enough to it that they had access to movement information. Weekly patterns. They identified Ruby before Victor photographed her. He looked at Carver. I need to know who sold that. Carver was quiet for a moment. You understand what you're asking me to look for? Someone inside, Dante said. Yes. Carver nodded slowly, set down his cup. Give me 48 hours. Dante stood up. You have 24. He drove back through the city alone, which he rarely did, and the city at 3 in the morning was a different thing than the city in daylight, quieter in the places that were supposed to be quiet, and louder in the places that weren't. And the streets had a specific emptiness that made the distances between things feel honest in a way that daylight obscured. He drove past West 34th without intending to. Or maybe he intended to and would not have admitted it. The bakery was dark, windows unlit, the handwritten menu on the chalkboard just visible through the glass from the street. Closed. Empty. Exactly as it should be at 3 in the morning. He kept driving. The 24 hours passed and Carver called with a name. Not a name Dante expected, not a name from the perimeter of his organization, not a mid-level logistics man or a compromised security contractor or someone with gambling debt that made them accessible. The name Carver gave him was Marcus. Dante sat down. He had been standing when the call came in. In his kitchen, coffee in hand, the morning light just beginning to come through the east windows. And when Carver said the name, he sat down in the nearest chair and held the phone and said nothing for a long time. Marcus Chen, Carver said again, carefully. 9 years. Your personal assistant. The access makes sense. He would have had visibility on your calendar, your building entry logs, your movement patterns, your standing instructions regarding specific access authorizations. He wouldn't have needed to steal anything. He already had everything. What do you have? Dante said. His voice was completely flat. A wire transfer. Routed through 2 accounts, but we traced the originating institution. $42,000 deposited 6 weeks ago. The destination account has Stern's fingerprints 3 layers back. Carver paused. And a phone, a burner registered in a name that doesn't exist, purchased in the garment district. Calls made to a number that traces to a Stern-adjacent contact. The call started 8 weeks ago. 8 weeks ago. Dante counted back. 8 weeks ago was the week he had first gone to Sweet Haven. The week he had stood in Hargrove's kitchen and asked Ruby what time she opened. The week he had driven past on a Tuesday morning and told himself it was his driver's decision. Someone had been watching him from inside, and the moment he showed any indication of what West 34th meant, that information had been packaged and sold. I need you to be certain, Dante said. I am certain, Carver said. I wouldn't call you with this if I wasn't. Dante set the phone down on the kitchen counter. He sat in the chair. Outside, the city was fully awake now, the morning running on its own logic, indifferent. He looked at his hands on the table. The coffee was getting cold. 9 years. Marcus had been with him for 9 years, had access to everything, knew the architecture of every protection Dante had built, understood exactly how the organization moved and breathed and communicated. He had been in the car when Dante called Reyes to put protection around Ruby. He had been in every meeting, heard every instruction, watched the whole shape of Dante's response to the threat, including the fact that Dante had agreed to Victor's 2-week timeline. Marcus knew what Dante was planning, which meant Stern knew, which meant the 2-week window was not a window at all. It was a container designed to keep Dante stationary while the real move was made around him. He called Reyes. "Ruby Castellano," he said, "escalate the perimeter immediately. I want physical presence, not surveillance distance. Someone inside the bakery, someone at the Meridian building entrance. Now." "What happened?" Reyes said. "Inside breach. I'll explain when I'm in front of you. Just move." He hung up. He called a second number, a man named Tor, who handled the specific category of internal problem that could not be managed through official security channels, and said 4 words: "Marcus Chen, find him." Then he stood up, put on his jacket, and left the penthouse. Marcus was not at his desk when Dante arrived on 44. His workstation was on, a half-finished coffee beside the keyboard, his tablet in its charging dock. His coat was on the hook by the door. Everything arranged to suggest a man who had stepped away for 5 minutes and would be right back. Dante stood in the middle of his own floor and looked at the coat on the hook. He had bought Marcus that coat. 3 Christmases ago, a custom-fitted charcoal wool, because Marcus worked long hours in cold offices and had mentioned once, only once in passing, that his old coat wasn't warm enough. Dante had noted it and acted on it without making it a moment, the way he did most things, because that was the arrangement. Marcus served with total loyalty, and Dante looked after what Marcus needed without requiring gratitude. 9 years. He walked to the window. He was working very hard to keep his breathing even because the alternative to controlled breathing was something he had not allowed himself in a very long time, and this was not the moment for it, and he knew that with complete clarity, which did not make it easier. His phone rang. Tor. "East Stairwell 22. He's there." Dante walked to the stairwell door, opened it. The east stairwell was dim, fluorescent, the kind of light that made everyone look sick. Marcus was on the landing between 22 and 23, sitting on the steps with his phone in his hand and no coat, which meant he had left his desk quickly, which meant something had told him to move. He looked up when the door opened. When he saw Dante, something happened in his face that was not guilt exactly. Guilt had a performance to it, a defensive reflex. What crossed Marcus's face was something quieter and more complete. It was the expression of a man who had known a moment was coming and had been living alongside its approach for weeks and had simply run out of distance. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He sat on the step and looked at Dante and waited. Dante came down 4 steps and stopped. He looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back. "How much did you tell them?" Dante said. Marcus said nothing. "Not a negotiation," Dante said. "I already know the wire and I already have the phone records. How much?" Marcus looked at his hands. His voice, when it came, was quiet and without effect. The voice of someone who has already moved past the point of pretending. "Everything they asked for," he said. "Movement patterns, calendar, access logs, the Reyes instruction. When you called him about the perimeter, they know the perimeter layout." "Yes." "They know the 2-week agreement with Victor." "Yes." Dante was still. The stairwell hummed with the low-frequency noise of a building's mechanical systems, the invisible infrastructure that kept 47 floors functioning. "Why?" he said. Marcus looked up. His face was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "My brother," he said. "He borrowed from Stern's people 2 years ago, 140,000. The interest ran. By last year it was 280 and climbing." He stopped, looked at his hands again. "They came to me 8 weeks ago, the file they had on my brother, what he'd done to generate the original debt. It would have ended him. Not just financially." A pause. "I didn't have a choice that wasn't going to cost someone something." "You chose who paid," Dante said. "Yes," Marcus said. "I did." The stairwell was quiet. Dante looked at Marcus Chen, who had sat in the back of his car for 9 years, who had absorbed 100 difficult mornings and covered 1,000 logistical failures and carried the weight of a job that required total discretion and total availability and very little acknowledgement, and who had, in the end, made the calculation that most people make when it comes down to their own blood. He had chosen his brother. Dante understood it. That was the part he had not expected, that he would understand it completely. He sat down on the step above Marcus, not beside him. Above, with 2 steps between them in the cold fluorescent light of the east stairwell. "Stern's next move," Dante said. "What did you give them in the last 48 hours?" Marcus looked up, surprised probably that the question was tactical rather than something else. "They asked about the perimeter shift schedule," he said. "I gave them the Friday rotation. Today was Thursday." "What time Friday?" "The shift change is at 6 a.m. There's a 12-minute window when the Meridian building entrance won't have coverage." 6 a.m., 12 minutes. Before the bakery opened, when Ruby would most likely be arriving to start prep work, she opened at 8, which meant she was usually inside by 6:30 at the latest, which meant she would be moving through the Meridian district between 5:50 and 6:20. 12-minute window. Dante stood up. He looked down at Marcus. "Stay here," he said. "Don't call anyone. Don't move." He went back through the stairwell door, and as it closed behind him, he was already calling Reyes, already calculating the hours between now and 6 a.m. Friday, already understanding that the 2-week window Victor had offered him had never been about the terminals at all. It had been about positioning everyone exactly where Stern needed them, with Dante focused on the wrong enemy, the perimeter structured around the wrong threat, and a 12-minute gap in the coverage of the one person who could not be inside that gap when Stern decided to use it. He had been outmaneuvered from the beginning. The question now was whether he still had enough hours to pull Ruby out of the path of what was coming before she walked into a morning she didn't know was waiting for her. He reached Reyes on the second ring and said, "Cancel the Friday rotation entirely and rebuild it from scratch, with people Stern's network has never seen before." "That's 6 hours," Reyes said. "Reyes de Jesus." "Then you have 6 hours," Dante said, and the elevator doors opened on 44, and he stepped in, and the marble floor was cold and pale as bone, and the building was silent around him, and somewhere 17 blocks away, Ruby Castellano was asleep in the Meridian apartments, walking the same route she always walked, entirely unaware that by the time she woke up, the city she moved through. Every morning was going to be a fundamentally different and more dangerous place than the one she had fallen asleep in. Reyes had 6 hours, and he used all of them. Dante did not sleep. He sat in the operations room on the 32nd floor, a space that did not appear on any building schematic, accessed through a maintenance corridor that required 2 keycards and a code changed weekly, and watched Reyes build a new perimeter from scratch with 8 people who had never been anywhere near West 34th or the Meridian district, people pulled from the outer edges of his network whose faces Stern's intelligence would not have mapped. Reyes worked the way he always worked, without commentary, without visible stress, with the focused economy of a man who had rebuilt broken security frameworks under pressure before and understood that panic was a resource expenditure that produced nothing. Dante watched the map on the wall screen. Meridian District, the route from Ruby's building to the bakery. 17 blocks, 3 turns, 1 stretch of unlit alley that she cut through because it saved 4 minutes, and she was always running 4 minutes behind. He had never walked that route. He had reviewed it once on a satellite image when Reyes first mapped her patterns, and he looked at it now with different eyes. The eyes of someone calculating not surveillance but interception, not protection but extraction if the timeline collapsed. "The 6 a.m. window," Dante said. "Stern's people will be in position by 5:30. "Agreed," Reyes said, not looking up from the laptop. "They'll want to be settled before the city wakes up. Less visibility, less reaction time for anyone watching." "How many?" "For a clean grab?" Reyes considered. 2, maybe 3. Stern doesn't waste people. He sends exactly what the job requires. "And if it's not a grab," Dante said, "if the grab is a secondary option." Reyes looked up then, met Dante's eyes. 2 is still enough, he said quietly. Dante looked at the map, at the alley. At the 17-block route that Ruby walked every morning with her empty bags and her replaced shoes and no awareness of what had been accumulating in the spaces around her life. "She can't walk tomorrow," Dante said. "You need to tell her that," Reyes said. "Or get someone to her building tonight who can intercept her before she leaves." "If I send someone to her building tonight and Stern's people are already watching the Meridian entrance, they'll know you identified the window," Reyes finished. "They'll move the timeline. And we don't know to what." They looked at each other across the table. The operations room hummed. Outside the sealed walls, 47 floors of building were going about the architecture of an ordinary Thursday night. And in the Meridian district, 17 blocks away, a woman was sleeping through the last hours she would have before morning came, and the city tried to use her. "I go myself," Dante said. Reyes was quiet for exactly 1 second. "If Stern sees you at the Meridian building, he'll know I know," Dante said. "Yes. Which collapses the timeline regardless. But if I send someone else and she doesn't open the door, or she panics, or she tries to call someone, we lose control of the situation." He stood up. "She'll open the door for me." Reyes looked at him for a moment with an expression that was the closest he ever came to saying something personal. He didn't say it. He went back to the laptop. "I'll have 2 people in the alley by 4:30, he said. "Clean faces. If the timeline shifts, they're already in position." Dante put on his jacket. "Marcus," he said, "he stays secured until this is resolved." "Understood." "His brother's debt," Dante said at the door. "Find out the current number." Reyes looked up. "Just find it out," Dante said, and left. He drove himself again. No partition to raise, no driver to brief, just the city at 2:40 in the morning, moving past the windows in the specific language of a place that runs on 2 shifts. The people who work the night and the people who cause it. He drove west, then south, then into the Meridian district, which was residential and quiet, the kind of neighborhood that had been almost something once and had settled instead into a comfortable adequacy. Ruby's building was a 6-story brick walk-up with a glass lobby door and a buzzer panel beside it. And the street in front of it was empty in the way streets are empty when everyone on them is exactly where they're supposed to be. He parked half a block east, sat for a moment. He had built his life on a very specific principle. The people around him remained safe as long as they remained peripheral. Drivers, assistants, building staff. They existed in a protected outer ring precisely because he kept them there, kept the weight of what he was away from them, maintained the distance. The principle had held for 20 years. It had failed, completely and specifically, the moment it met Ruby Castellano, who was not peripheral, who had somehow moved from the outer ring to the center of something without his permission and possibly without her own understanding of it, and who was now asleep 6 stories above a street where his failure of discipline had deposited a threat she knew nothing about. He got out of the car. He buzzed 6C. It was 2:53 in the morning. He expected to wait. He expected her to be deep asleep, unreachable, and to have to buzz 3 or 4 times before anything happened. She answered in 11 seconds. "Who is it?" Not groggy. Alert, slightly guarded, the voice of someone who does not sleep heavily. "Dante," he said. Silence. 4 full seconds of it. "It's almost 3 in the morning," she said. "I know." Another silence. Then the door buzzed open. She was waiting in her doorway on the 6th floor when he came up the stairs. She had not taken the elevator, he noted, which meant she had moved fast, gotten dressed fast, positioned herself in a place where she could see him coming before he reached her. She was in jeans and a gray pullover with her hair loose and her arms crossed over her chest, and she looked at him coming down the hallway with an expression that contained about 6 different things and was working to keep all of them controlled. "You're not hurt," she said, assessing him fast, top to bottom. "No." "Then whatever this is, you could have called." "You don't have a secure line," he said. She stared at him. "I don't—" "Dante, nobody has a secure line. Normal people just have phones." She stepped back from the door. "Get in." The apartment was small and warm and smelled like the bakery brought home. Sugar, yeast, something caramelized. And it was full of the specific kind of organized clutter that belongs to someone who is always in motion. Proofing notes on the kitchen counter, a cookbook open on the table, 2 pairs of shoes by the door at angles that suggested they'd been kicked off rather than placed. It was the most ordinary space Dante had been inside in years. He stood in the middle of it and felt the contrast of it against everything the last 18 hours had contained. Ruby stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms still crossed. "Talk," she said. He talked. Not everything, not Marcus, not Carver, not the specific architecture of what Stern and Kane had built around her without her knowledge, but enough. He told her there were people watching her building. He told her the route she walked every morning had been mapped by people who did not wish her well. He told her she could not walk to the bakery tomorrow morning, could not leave the building before he said it was clear, could not use her usual route for the foreseeable future. She listened. She did not interrupt, which he had expected her to do, because Ruby Castellano interrupted when she had something to say, and she always had something to say. She stood in the kitchen doorway and listened to all of it with the kind of concentrated stillness that meant she was processing fast and holding reaction for the end. When he finished, she said, "How long? How long what? How long have people been watching me?" He held her gaze. "Approximately 10 days of confirmed surveillance," he said, "possibly longer." "And you knew?" "I knew about a threat connected to my business," he said. "I didn't know the specifics of how close it was to you until last night." "That's not the same as not knowing," she said. "You knew there was danger and you didn't tell me." "I was managing it." "Managing it." She said the 2 words back at him slowly. "Managing it." She uncrossed her arms and pushed off the doorframe and walked to the kitchen counter and put both hands flat on it with her back to him, and he watched her breathe through something. Not panic, not the particular helplessness of someone who felt out of control, but the specific fury of someone who had just been informed that the ground under their ordinary life had been unsafe for weeks, while someone else decided whether to tell them about it. She turned around. "I'm not something you manage," she said. "I'm a person." "I know that." "Do you?" Her voice was not loud. It was the quiet, flat voice he had learned to pay more attention to than anything else. "Because everything you just described, the protection you arranged without telling me, the decisions you made about my safety without asking me, the information you held back because you were handling it, that's not protecting someone, Dante. That's controlling them." He said nothing. Because she was right. He had known she would be right about this, had known it in the back of his mind since the night he'd first called Reyes, and he had proceeded anyway because the alternative, telling her, involving her, making her a participant in the reality of what surrounded him, had felt like a more immediate danger than the one she was describing. "I need you to stay inside tomorrow morning," he said. "I have a bakery to open." "I know, I'll have someone. I'm not going to let strangers run my business because you didn't tell me there was a problem when there was a problem." She looked at him. "How do I know your people are trustworthy? How do I know the people you're sending to protect me aren't connected to the same thing you're trying to protect me from?" The question landed precisely because it was exactly the right question, and because 24 hours ago he would have answered it without hesitation, and now he could not. Because 24 hours ago, Marcus Chen had been the man he trusted most in the world, and Marcus had been selling the shape of his life for 8 weeks. "You don't," he said. "You'd have to trust me." The silence between them was long. "I do trust you," she said finally. "That's not the problem." She looked at him steadily. "The problem is that you don't trust me. You didn't trust me to handle the truth. You didn't trust me to make my own choices about my own safety. You showed up at 3 in the morning not because you wanted to tell me the truth, but because you ran out of options that didn't require telling me the truth." He stood in her living room. Around him the apartment was warm and ordinary, and the books were slightly crooked on the shelf, and the proofing notes on the kitchen counter were in her handwriting, round and fast, and everything in the space was the evidence of a person who had built a life with their own hands and their own choices, and who was now sitting across from him and accurately describing the way he had treated that life as a logistical problem to be solved rather than an autonomy to be respected. "Yes," he said. She blinked. "Yes?" "You're right," he said. "All of it. I ran out of options." He looked at her. "I'm sorry." Ruby looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. Not softening exactly, more like a door opening to the next room where a harder conversation lived. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She sat across from him at the kitchen table with the cookbook between them, open to a page about laminated dough. She looked at the table for a moment. "Tell me the rest," she said. So he told her the rest. All of it. Marcus, Carver, the Westport terminals, Stern's architecture, the 12-minute window, and what it was designed for. He told it without the controlled redactions he had been trained to apply, without managing the sequence for the way she would receive it, just the full shape of the thing laid out on the table between them. She listened. When it was done, she sat for a while. "The man who sold you out," she said. "Marcus. He did it for his brother." "Yes. And you're still angry." "I'm still—" He stopped, looked at his hands. "I understand why he did it," he said. "That doesn't change what it cost." "No," she said. "It doesn't." She looked at him. "What are you going to do about tomorrow?" "I'm going to end it," he said. "How?" "Victor wants the terminals to deliver them to Stern," Dante said. "Stern wants the terminals so he can leverage them against the Port Authority contract renewal in 18 months. There's a federal infrastructure bid coming up, and whoever controls Westport controls the bid." He looked up. "So I'm going to give them a different problem." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm going to make sure the terminals aren't worth what Stern thinks they're worth," he said. "And I'm going to do it publicly enough that the federal bid becomes visible in a way nobody in this arrangement wants." He paused. "Which means I take the loss on the terminals to take the value out of the leverage. Victor gets nothing to deliver. Stern gets nothing he came for. And what does that cost you?" $40 million annually, he said. "And whatever it costs to restructure the port operations." She looked at him for a long moment. "You'd do that." "I'm going to do that." "For me?" He looked at her across the kitchen table in the small apartment that smelled like sugar and warm bread and the ordinary, specific life she had built. "I'm going to do it," he said, "because it's the right play. And because there is no version of the alternative I'm willing to consider." Ruby reached across the table and put her hand over his. She didn't say anything. She just left it there, warm and direct, the way she did everything. Without ceremony, without calculation, just the fact of it. At 4:17 a.m., his phone buzzed. Reyes. He answered. "2 men," Reyes said. "They're in the alley." Dante's hand went still under Ruby's. "Stern's?" "Unknown faces. Armed. They went in at 4:10. Dante stood up. His chair scraped the floor. Ruby looked up at him, reading his face. "They moved the window," he said to her, and to Reyes. "How many of mine are in position?" 2 in the alley, 2 at the Meridian entrance, 2 more on the north end of the route. "They're not after the route," Dante said. "If they move to 4 a.m., they're not waiting for her to walk. They're coming to the building." He was already moving, already reaching for his jacket. "Get everyone to the Meridian entrance right now." Ruby was on her feet. "What's happening?" "They changed the plan," he said. "They're not waiting for morning." He looked at her. His voice dropped. Not softer, just direct as he had ever spoken to her or anyone. "I need you to go into your bedroom, lock the door, and not open it for anyone who doesn't give you a code word. The word is Hargrove. Do you understand? Dante. Ruby." He said her name and she stopped. He looked at her face in the kitchen light, the dark eyes that had looked straight at him in an elevator when everyone else looked away, the face that showed everything, that refused to hide what it felt. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you, but I need you behind a locked door." She held his eyes for 1 second, then, "Hargrove," she said. "Yes." She went. He heard the bedroom lock engage. He moved to the apartment door, opened it, stepped into the hallway. The 6th floor was quiet. The building smelled of old wood and someone's cooking from earlier in the night. The elevator at the end of the corridor was on the ground floor, the indicator light showing L. It was moving. Someone had called it from the lobby. Dante pressed his back to the wall beside the elevator and looked at the indicator light climbing, L to 2 to 3. And his pulse was elevated but controlled. the specific physiological state he had learned to operate in years ago, when control and fear occupied the same moment, and you had to choose which one drove. He looked at his phone. One message from Reyes sent 30 seconds ago. Lobby entrance breached. 2 down on our side, pursuing. 2 down. His people. In the lobby, 6 floors below. The elevator was at 5. Dante was unarmed, which was a choice he rarely made and was making now because he had driven to a residential building at 3 in the morning and had not anticipated the timeline collapsing by 2 full hours, and the miscalculation sat in his chest like a stone. The elevator hit 6. The doors opened. 1 man. Big, economical build, dark jacket, the kind of face that has spent years being forgettable. He stepped off the elevator and turned towards 6C and found Dante standing in the hallway 3 meters from the door. They looked at each other. The man's right hand moved toward his jacket, and Dante moved at the same instant. Not away, toward, which was the only choice that closed the distance before the hand completed its arc. He caught the man's wrist with both hands and drove him back into the elevator door frame, hard, the impact loud in the empty hallway, and the man was strong, significantly strong, the kind of strength that comes from professional conditioning, and he redirected fast, twisting his wrist out of Dante's grip and getting his elbow up. The elbow caught Dante across the left cheekbone. The pain was immediate and bright, the kind that fills your whole head for a half second and then focuses down into a specific burning point. Dante took it and didn't go back, grabbed the man's jacket collar with his left hand, and drove his right palm into the man's nose. Not a punch, a strike, heel of the hand, the way you do it when you need the result without the follow-through a punch requires. The man went sideways, hit the wall. His hand came out of his jacket and there was something in it, but Dante already had the wrist again and bent it back and the thing hit the carpet and Dante kicked it down the hall away from both of them. The man shoved off the wall and came back with his full weight, and they went into the opposite wall together, Dante's shoulder taking the impact, and for 4 seconds it was nothing but pressure and breath, and the close, ugly work of 2 people trying to control the same space. And Dante could feel his cheekbone throbbing, and the man's breath was ragged and hot, and somewhere below them an alarm had started going off, the building's fire system, which meant Reyes had triggered it from outside to clear the lobby. Dante got his forearm across the man's throat. Pressed. The man grabbed his arm with both hands and pulled, and Dante held the pressure and held it until the man's legs went and they went down together, and Dante held on until the grabbing at his arm went slack, and then he held on for 3 more seconds, and then he let go and stood up. The hallway was very quiet except for the alarm below and his own breathing, which was rough and too fast and tasted of copper where he'd bitten the inside of his cheek. He straightened. His jacket was torn at the left shoulder seam. His cheekbone was swelling fast. He could feel it, the specific tightening heat of tissue reacting to impact. He looked at the man on the floor, unconscious, breathing, and then at the door of 6C. He walked to it, knocked twice, slow. "It's me," he said. A pause. "Hargrove," he said. The lock turned. Ruby opened the door and looked at his face and said nothing for a full second. Then she said quietly, "You're bleeding." "It's minor," he said. "Your face disagrees," she said, and reached up and touched his jaw just below the cheekbone, careful, her fingertips reading the damage the way a person does when they're trying to assess something they're afraid to see clearly. Her hands were warm. They were shaking slightly, which he recognized as adrenaline she hadn't spent because she had been locked in a room with nowhere to put it. His phone rang. "Reyes." He answered. "Building is clear," Reyes said. "Both men in the lobby are secured. The one on 6? "Secured," Dante said. "Kane's location?" Reyes said. Dante looked at Ruby standing in her doorway with her hand still near his jaw and the alarm still going below, and the city outside the window beginning to show the first gray edge of a morning that had arrived faster and harder than anyone in this hallway had planned for. "Get me Victor Kane," Dante said. "Not a meeting, not a message. Get him in a room." He paused. "Tonight." "It's already today," Reyes said. "Then get him in a room today," Dante said. He hung up. Ruby was looking at him, not with fear. He had looked at her enough times now to know what fear looked like in her face, and this was not it. This was something more complicated. The expression of a person standing at the exact boundary between the life they had been living and the life that is now going to be required of them, trying to decide if they are willing to cross it. "It's not over," she said. "No," he said, "but you're going to end it." "Yes," he said. She looked at him for a long moment in the hallway of her ordinary building with the alarm below them and the unconscious man on the floor 10 feet away and the gray morning coming through the window at the end of the corridor, and then she said, "Then go do it." He held her gaze. He turned and walked toward the stairwell, and behind him he heard her apartment door stay open, which meant she was standing in the doorway watching him go, and he did not look back, because if he looked back he was going to stop walking, and he could not stop walking. Not yet. Not until Victor Kane was in a room and Aldrich Stern understood completely what it cost to use someone Dante Moretti had chosen to protect. He pushed through the stairwell door and went down, fast, his footsteps hard on the concrete, his cheekbone burning, his shoulder aching from the wall, the alarm still going in the building around him, and somewhere in the city Reyes was making a call that was going to bring Victor Kane to a room. And what happened in that room was going to determine whether the morning that was coming was the end of something or the beginning of something worse. He hit the ground floor door and pushed through it into the lobby, and the cold air of the morning came at him, and he walked into it without slowing down, because there was no longer any distance left between him and what had to be done. And he had stopped running from it the moment he'd heard the elevator climbing toward the 6th floor and understood that the thing he was most afraid of losing was already worth everything it was going to cost him to keep. Victor Kane was in a room by 7:15 that morning. Not a restaurant this time, not a neutral venue with coffee on the table and the performance of civility laid over the top of what both men were actually doing. Reyes had put him in a warehouse space in the port district that Dante owned through 4 layers of legitimate holding companies. A building that appeared in no record connected to his name, which meant Victor had been brought somewhere that did not exist on any map Victor's people could reference. That was intentional. Dante wanted Victor in a space that communicated, without a word being said, that the architecture of this conversation was entirely different from the last one. Dante arrived at 7:10. His cheekbone had swollen overnight into something visible and dark. A bruise spreading from the cheekbone toward the eye socket in the specific purple-yellow gradient of deep tissue impact. He had not iced it. He had not changed his jacket, which was still torn at the left shoulder seam. He had driven from the Meridian district directly to the port, and he looked like exactly what he was. A man who had spent the night in a building hallway, keeping something alive that someone else had decided to take from him. He walked into the warehouse, and Victor Kane was seated in a metal chair in the center of an empty concrete floor with 2 of Reyes' people standing at a distance that was close enough to be meaningful. Victor's hands were not bound. That was also intentional. Dante did not want this to look like what it wasn't. Victor looked at Dante's face when he came in. He looked at the bruise, at the torn jacket, at the specific quality of stillness Dante carried into the room, and something shifted in his expression. Not fear. Victor Kane did not do fear the way ordinary people did, but a recalibration, a reassessment of the variables, the look of a man who has been running a calculation and just received a new input that changes the result. Dante pulled a chair from the wall, set it in front of Victor, and sat down. Close. Not aggressive close, just close enough that the conversation did not require any volume. He looked at Victor for a moment without speaking. "Stern," he said. Victor's jaw moved slightly. "I don't know what you—" "Victor," Dante said. His voice was quiet and very tired and completely without performance. "I know the arrangement. I know the terminals were never for you. I know the dinner outside state lines, and I know the shell company, and I know the 42,000 that moved from Stern's account to a man who sat outside my office for 9 years." He held Victor's gaze. "I know everything, so let's not do the part where you try to manage the information because I'm very tired and my face hurts and I don't have the patience for it this morning." Victor looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly he sat back in his chair. He looked at the concrete floor, then at Dante again. "How long have you known?" he said. "Long enough," Dante said. "Tell me how deep it goes." Victor was quiet. Dante waited. He had learned over many years that silence was the most effective pressure because it required the other person to fill it, and the way they filled it told you more than any question you could ask. Stern approached me 14 months ago, Victor said finally. The federal port bid. You already know about that. He needed Westport to make the bid viable. He couldn't take it from you directly because a move like that starts a war, and Stern doesn't fight wars. He buys them. Victor looked at his hands. He offered me 8% of the federal contract value if I delivered the transfer. $80 million over the life of the contract. And the leverage, Dante said. That was your contribution. I knew you had no attachments, Victor said. I've known you for 16 years and you had no attachments. And then you started going to a bakery on West 34th. He looked up. I found the weakness. Stern provided the methodology. The man inside, Dante said. Marcus. Was that you or Stern? Stern identified him, Victor said. The brother's debt was already in Stern's ledger. He acquires debt the way other people acquire real estate. He holds it until it's useful. When we identified your pattern on West 34th, he went through his holdings and found the connection. Victor paused. I didn't know about the 6 a.m. move. Last night. That wasn't part of our arrangement. Dante looked at him. I want you to understand that, Victor said, and his voice had something in it that was not quite the thing Dante expected. Not the slick self-preservation of a man trying to negotiate down from a bad position, but something more uncomfortable than that, something that sounded like it meant it. The photograph, the demand. That was leverage, Dante. That was business. What happened at her building this morning? That was Stern cutting me out and moving on his own timeline. He decided the 2 weeks was too slow. Because you told him I agreed, Dante said. Yes. So he knew I was stalling. He's been in this longer than you think, Victor said. He's patient, but he's not passive. When you agreed to the 2 weeks, he read it as delay, not compliance, and he decided to accelerate. Dante sat with this. The warehouse was cold, the kind of damp concrete cold that comes in off the port water and never entirely leaves. Through the high, narrow windows, the morning was fully bright now, gray and flat, the light of an overcast day that didn't commit to anything. What do you want out of this? Dante said. Victor looked at him steadily. I want to walk out of this room, he said, and I want Stern to understand that I'm not his mechanism anymore. Stern, Dante said. Where is he? He has an office in the Halcyon building on the east side, Victor said. Legitimate business on the top 4 floors. He'll be there by 9. And his people who were at the Meridian building. They'll report back to him this morning that the operation failed, Victor said. He'll know you know. He'll be deciding right now whether to run or consolidate. He'll consolidate, Dante said. Men like Stern don't run. They convert. Agreed, Victor said quietly. Dante stood up. He looked down at Victor Kane in the metal chair on the concrete floor, a man he had known for 16 years, who had been his adversary and nearly his partner and was now something harder to categorize, a man who had aimed something at Ruby and missed and was sitting here telling him where to aim next. The calculation of what to do with that was complex, and Dante did not rush it. The Westport terminals, Dante said. I'm dissolving the holding structure and bringing the operations under direct federal oversight as part of a voluntary compliance initiative. The Port Authority has been wanting a transparency framework for the North Dock for 2 years. I'm going to give them one. He looked at Victor. By the time I'm finished, the terminals will be worth exactly what they're worth on paper, which is considerably less than what Stern needs them to be worth for the federal bid to work. Victor understood immediately. He loses the bid. He loses the bid, he loses the $80 million he promised you, and he loses the infrastructure play he's been building for 14 months, Dante said. And he loses it publicly, which is the part he'll find hardest to recover from. Victor was quiet for a moment. That costs you significantly. Yes, Dante said. It does. He picked up his chair, moved it back to the wall. When you walk out of here, you're going to tell Stern that the move last night failed and that I've been in contact with the Federal Port Authority since 7 a.m. He looked at Victor across the empty space. That part's true, by the way. Reyes made the call at 6:50. Victor absorbed this. Then slowly, he stood. He straightened his jacket, which was the gesture of a man reestablishing something in himself rather than in the room around him. And between us, he said. Between us, Dante said, is going to depend entirely on what you do in the next 72 hours. Victor nodded once. He walked to the warehouse door, and one of Reyes's men opened it, and the morning light came in flat and cold, and Victor walked into it without looking back. Dante stood in the empty warehouse on the concrete floor and let the silence of it settle around him. His cheekbone hurt. His shoulder ached where it had met the wall in the sixth-floor hallway. He was 37 years old, and he had spent the last 12 hours in the specific sustained effort of keeping something alive that someone else had decided to take. And he was tired in a way that was not just physical. A tiredness that went down into the architecture of the life he had built. All those carefully maintained distances. All that controlled isolation, 20 years of not allowing anything to matter enough to be taken. He stood in the warehouse and understood, completely and without sentimentality, that it was over. Not just the threat, the life. The life he had built to avoid this, to avoid having something worth taking, was gone. Because he had something worth taking now, and he had fought for it in a hallway at 3 a.m. with his bare hands, and no amount of restructured holding companies or dissolved terminal agreements was going to rebuild the distance that had existed before the elevator doors opened and a woman walked in with frosting on her hands and refused to be afraid of him. He walked out of the warehouse and called Ruby. She answered on the second ring. "Are you all right?" she said. Not a greeting, just that directly. "Yes," he said. "Is it done?" "Most of it," he said. "There's one more conversation." He stood in the port district with the water smell coming off the dock and the morning running its ordinary logic around him. "I'm going to need a few hours." "I know," she said. "I opened the bakery." He stopped. Reyes had 3 people on the block and one inside drinking coffee and pretending to read a newspaper, she said, and her voice had the quality it always had when she was doing something she had already decided on and was reporting it rather than asking permission. "It's Thursday. Thursday is the assorted tray for 41. I'm not going to let someone else's bad decisions close my business." He stood on the dock and looked at the gray water and felt something move through him that he did not have an efficient word for. "Ruby," he said. "Come when you're done," she said. "I'll keep the lemon tarts." She hung up. He went to see Aldrich Stern. The Halcyon building was 12 stories of glass and steel on the east side. The kind of building that announced legitimacy loudly enough to make you wonder what it was compensating for. Dante went through the front entrance alone, which was not the entrance Stern's people expected, because they were watching the parking structure and the service access on the south side, the approaches a man brings muscle through. He went through the lobby like a man who owned the building, which was the way he went through every lobby, and he took the elevator to the 10th floor and walked past a receptionist who said, "Sir, you can't," and kept walking to the corner office. Aldrich Stern was on the phone when Dante opened the door. He was smaller than his reputation suggested, compact, 63, with the controlled physicality of a man who had stayed lean through discipline rather than genetics, and eyes that moved fast and cataloged everything. The eyes of a man who had survived by assessing rooms accurately and quickly for 6 decades. He looked at Dante in his doorway, at the bruised face, the torn jacket, the fact that he had walked through the building entirely alone, and ended his phone call without saying goodbye. "Mr. Moretti," he said. His voice was even. Dante walked into the office and closed the door and sat in the chair across from Stern's desk without being invited. He looked at Stern. Stern looked at him. "Your men are in police custody," Dante said. "The 2 from the lobby and the 1 from the 6th floor. They were reported by the building's fire response team as trespassers during an alarm event." He paused. "Nothing that connects to you directly, because I'm not interested in the connection becoming visible. What I am interested in is whether you understand what happened this morning." Stern's expression did not change. "Tell me what happened this morning," he said. "You made a move on something that belongs to me," Dante said, "and it didn't work." "Ms. Castellano is not I know what she is," Dante said. "She's a person who runs a bakery and has nothing to do with the Port Authority or the federal bid or anything else you've been building for 14 months. And you used her as a pressure point because someone told you she was accessible, and this morning you found out she wasn't." He looked at Stern steadily. The Westport terminals are already in the process of being transferred to federal oversight. The voluntary compliance filing went in at 6:50 this morning. By tomorrow afternoon, the North Dock infrastructure will be under a framework that makes the federal bid non-viable for any private operator. Stern was quiet for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. The fast internal adjustment of a man running the numbers in real time. That's a significant financial sacrifice, he said. Yes, Dante said. It is. You did it for her, Stern said. Not mockingly, as a statement of fact that he was trying to locate within a framework that made sense to him. I did it because it was the right resolution, Dante said. The cost is the cost. Stern looked at him. There was something in the look that was harder to read than calculation, something that might have been, in a different man in a different room, the distant relative of respect. You understand this doesn't end my interest in port infrastructure, he said. I understand that, Dante said. And you understand that the next time you build something in my city, using people who are connected to my life, the resolution won't be a voluntary compliance filing. He stood. We're clear. He walked out. He walked through the Halcyon lobby and out onto the street and stood on the east side of a city that was going about its Thursday morning in complete indifference to what had just concluded inside a 10th floor corner office. And he breathed the cold air and felt the bruise on his cheekbone and the tear in his jacket and the specific exhaustion of a man who has spent everything he had on a single outcome and is now standing in the aftermath of it, trying to take stock of what remains. What remained was considerable, actually. The empire was intact, damaged in the Westport restructure, which was real money and real operational complexity, but intact. Reyes had contained the security breach. Marcus was secured. Victor Kane had walked out of a warehouse with a new understanding of his position. Stern had been closed, cleanly, without escalation that would draw the kind of attention neither of them wanted. And Ruby was in her bakery on West 34th, making Thursday assorted trays for the 41st floor. He drove there. He parked where he always parked, the same spot on the north side of the street, and he walked to the bakery door and pushed it open, and the bell above the door made its small sound and the smell came at him. Vanilla, brown sugar, warm yeast, the specific warmth of a space that has been in production since before dawn. And Ruby looked up from the counter. She looked at his face. The bruise had deepened through the morning into something genuinely vivid, a dark mark that started at the cheekbone and reached toward the eye socket, and was not the kind of thing a person could see without it landing somewhere in their chest. She didn't say anything about it. She reached under the counter and put a cup of coffee on the glass top, and then put a lemon tart beside it on a small plate. He sat at the counter. He drank the coffee. He ate the lemon tart, which was good. It was always good. The crust thin and crisp, the curd sharp and clean, the kind of thing that tasted like it had been made by someone who understood that simple things done with complete attention are the hardest things to get right. The bakery was quiet. 2 customers at a corner table, the city moving past the windows in its ordinary way. Victor? Ruby asked from the other side of the counter, not looking at him, arranging things in the glass case. Cooperative, Dante said. He wanted out of Stern's arrangement more than he wanted the terminals. And Stern? Filed for federal oversight on Westport this morning. It closes Stern's play. Ruby looked up then. You gave up the terminals. Yes. She held his gaze. How much? Doesn't matter. Dante. He looked at her. 40 million annually, he said, and restructuring costs. Call it 60 in the first year. She was quiet. She looked at him for a long moment with the expression he had come to know as her thinking face. Not emotional, not reactive, just fully present and processing the way she approached everything that mattered. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, I did, he said. There were other ways. Not clean ones, he said. Not ones that ended it completely. Stern wanted the infrastructure play. I removed the infrastructure play. Everything else was just buying time. He set down the coffee cup. I don't want to buy time anymore. She came out from behind the counter. She sat on the stool beside him, which she had never done before. She always stayed behind the counter, always maintained that small professional distance, the glass case between them. She sat beside him now and looked at the street through the front window, and he looked at the side of her face, the dark hair that was doing its usual slow escape from the knot she'd put it in at 5 in the morning, the flower on her collar, the small line of tiredness below her eyes that said she had not slept any more than he had. "Marcus," she said. "Secured," he said. "I haven't decided yet." "He has a brother," she said. "I know." "That's not an excuse," she said, "but it's something." "It's something," he agreed. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to cover the brother's debt," he said. "Whatever Stern was holding over him, I'll buy it out." He paused. "And Marcus is going to spend the next several years finding a way to have earned that." Ruby looked at him. "That's harder than firing him," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked back at the street. "You know you're a strange man," she said. "I've been told." "You built your whole life around not needing anything," she said. "And then you walk into a bakery and the first argument we have is about $6, and you come back the next week like it never happened, and the week after that, and the one after that, and I kept waiting for you to decide I wasn't worth the inconvenience and stop showing up." She looked at him. "You never stopped." "No," he said. "Why?" she said. Simple, direct, the way she always asked the thing she actually wanted to know. He looked at her face in the Thursday morning light of a small bakery on West 34th, flour on her collar and tiredness under her eyes, and the full weight of the last 18 hours between them on the counter, like something that had been set down and not yet picked back up. "Because you looked at me in an elevator," he said, "and you didn't flinch." Ruby held his gaze for a moment. Then she reached up and, very carefully, put her hand against his face. The undamaged side, the right cheekbone, her palm warm and flat against his jaw the way she'd touched him in her doorway that morning. He stayed very still. He was not a man people touched, and the people who tried did it with some calculation in it, some angle being worked, and her hand on his face had none of that. It was just her hand, just warmth, just the direct and uncomplicated fact of her caring about whether he was all right. "You need to sleep," she said. "I know." "And eat something that isn't a lemon tart." The lemon tart was good. "Everything here is good," she said, without vanity, just accuracy, and he almost smiled, felt the movement of it in his face before it fully arrived, which was unusual. Smiling was not something his face did easily or often, and she saw it happening and something lit up in her expression, something warm and a little triumphant, like she had just won an argument she'd been having for months. She dropped her hand, went back behind the counter, began assembling the Thursday tray for 41. Dante sat at the counter and drank his coffee and watched her work. She moved efficiently, no wasted motion, everything in a sequence that had been developed through 4 years of repetition. And she didn't perform for him, didn't adjust what she was doing because he was watching, just worked the way she always worked, completely and without self-consciousness. He thought about his father, which he rarely did. His father had been a man who loved someone in the way that left him open to everything, who had trusted the wrong person with that openness and paid for it with his life. Dante had taken that lesson and built a wall from it, had spent 20 years maintaining the wall with both hands, had watched the wall do exactly what walls do, keep danger out and keep everything else out too, until the inside of the wall was very quiet and very safe and absolutely empty. He had been so certain that the wall was wisdom. He looked at Ruby arranging pastries in a white box with a concentration that she gave to everything, the same concentration she gave to the argument about $6, to the question she asked at 3 in the morning when he finally told her the truth, to the hand on his face in a hallway where an unconscious man lay on the floor 10 feet away. The wall was not wisdom. The wall was just fear with better architecture. He had known that for a while, actually. He had known it approximately since the first Thursday he stood in Hargrove's kitchen without a reason to be there and understood that the absence of a reason was the most honest thing he'd felt in years. "I want to tell you something," he said. Ruby looked up. "I've been managing the distance between us," he said. "From the beginning. Every time I came in here, I was also maintaining a calculation. How much, how often, what it costs, what it risks. Running the numbers on what it would take to make this sustainable without it becoming a vulnerability." He held her gaze. I'm done with that calculation. She was very still on the other side of the counter. I don't want to manage it anymore, he said. I want to be here without calculating what it costs. I don't know how to do that yet. I've been doing the other thing for 20 years and I'm not sure the habit just stops. But I want to learn how to do it differently. He stopped, let the words sit. I thought you should know. Ruby looked at him for a long moment. The bakery was quiet around them, the two customers at the corner table in their own conversation, the city continuing its indifferent mourning outside the glass. Then she said, You drove to my apartment at 3 a.m. and fought someone in my hallway. Yes, he said, with no weapon and no backup. The timing was compressed, he said. That's not managing the distance, she said. That's already the other thing. She looked at him with those dark eyes that had been looking at him straight on since an elevator in January, that had never once done him the disservice of looking away from what he was. You've been doing it differently for a while. You just didn't tell yourself that's what it was. He sat with that. It was probably true. It was almost certainly true. So, she said, and went back to the Thursday tray. Come back tomorrow. And the day after. And stop leaving money under coffee cups because we've had that argument enough times and I always win it. She didn't look up. And maybe at some point you could try staying for more than 40 minutes. I can do that, he said. Good, she said. He finished the coffee. He sat for another 20 minutes, which was longer than he usually stayed, and they talked about small things. The new menu she was considering, whether the chalkboard needed replacing, the fact that the east camera on the intersection outside had been angled wrong for 3 weeks, and she'd reported it twice. Ordinary things. The kind of conversation that has no stakes in it, that is just two people in a warm room talking about the texture of a Thursday. He left at 10:30. At the door he stopped, the way he had stopped the very first time, and he didn't turn around. Same time tomorrow? He said. Behind him, without hesitation. I'll be here, she said. He walked out onto West 34th. The street was busy now, the morning fully underway, people moving past in both directions with their ordinary purposes, the city doing what the city always did, running on its own logic, indifferent to what happened inside its buildings and hallways and small bakeries, indifferent to what a man chose to let himself feel, or chose to wall away, or chose, after 20 years of practice in the wrong direction, to finally stop managing. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The cold was the same cold it had been in January when an elevator door opened and a woman came in with a broken heel and frosting on her hands. Except that was 6 months ago now. And the cold was different, the season was different, and he was standing on a street in a city that had tried this week to take something from him and had failed. And the thing it had failed to take was still inside, arranging pastries in a white box, flour on her collar, completely certain she would win the next argument about the tip. He was not a man who had learned to be easy with himself. He did not expect to become one. There were things behind him that would not be undone, the weight of the life he had built, the cost of the Westport restructure, Marcus Chen in a secured room with a debt that was going to take years to repay in every sense, the bruise on his cheekbone that was going to take 10 days to fully clear. None of it was clean. None of it had resolved into something simple. But he walked to his car and the morning was around him. And somewhere in the Halcyon building, Aldrich Stern was reassessing the geometry of his ambitions. And somewhere Victor Kane was making a phone call that was going to be the most honest conversation he'd had in years. And in a warehouse in the Port District, a man who had driven him for 9 years was sitting in a chair thinking about his brother and what things cost. And 47 floors above the city, a penthouse was empty and quiet, and would remain empty until tonight when Dante came back to it as a different version of the man who had left it at 2:40 in the morning. Not a better man, necessarily. Not a simpler one. But one who had stopped pretending that the distance between himself and the things that mattered to him was the same thing as safety. He got in the car. He sat for a moment. Through the bakery window, 50 meters down the street, he could see Ruby moving behind the counter. A shape, a suggestion of motion, warm light inside the glass. He drove. He was back on West 34th the next morning at 9, and the morning after that, and the one after that. Some mornings they talked. Some mornings she was too deep in production to do more than hand him coffee and point at the tart of the day. Some mornings he sat at the counter for an hour and read documents, and she worked around him as if he had always been part of the inventory of the room, which, eventually, in the way that true things become true, not through declaration but through accumulation, he was. 6 months after a January elevator, Dante Moretti came to Sweet Haven after closing. He had called ahead, which was new for him. Calling ahead was an acknowledgement of the other person's time, was a small subordination of his own schedule to theirs, was the kind of thing that would have seemed unnecessary once and now seemed obvious. Ruby unlocked the door for him herself, still in her apron, and the bakery was lit with the low, warm light she left on when she was cleaning up, and it smelled of vanilla and caramelized sugar and the specific end-of-day warmth of a room that had been full of people and was now quiet. He stood in the middle of the bakery. He looked at her. She looked at him with the same expression she'd had in the elevator in January, fully present, reading the room, not afraid. He reached into his jacket pocket. He was not a man who had prepared speeches. He did not have one now. He had the ring, which he had chosen himself without asking anyone's opinion, and he had the particular knowledge that had been accumulating for 6 months. The knowledge of how she took her coffee. The knowledge of which arguments she would win before they started. The knowledge of the way her hands shook slightly when she was trying not to show she was scared. And the knowledge that she had stood in a doorway at 3 in the morning and looked at his damaged face and said, "Come when you're done," and gone back to work. He went down on one knee on the floor of her bakery, which had flour on it still from the day's work, and he looked up at her face and said, "I promised myself a long time ago that I wouldn't do this." Ruby looked down at him. Her eyes were very bright. "I know," she said. "You changed the math," he said. She laughed, surprised, open, the same laugh he had heard in the 41st floor kitchen months ago, the loudest sound he could remember in any room. "That's your proposal?" she said. "You changed the math?" "You changed everything," he said. "Say yes." She looked at him for a long moment. The bakery was quiet around them. Outside, the city ran its indifferent evening. Inside, the vanilla light and the flour-covered floor, and a man on one knee who had spent 20 years building walls and had spent the last 6 months learning, imperfectly and with considerable resistance, what it meant to finally put something down. "Yes," Ruby said. He put the ring on her finger. He stood up. She stepped forward and put both hands on his face, one on each side, careful on the left where the bruise had been, gone now but remembered, and looked at him the way she always looked at him, straight on, seeing the whole thing, not looking away. "You're going to be terrible at this," she said. "Probably," he said. "I'm going to win most of the arguments. All of the ones about money," he said. "The others are negotiable." She smiled. It was the private smile, the one she couldn't quite contain, and he had learned to watch for it because it was the most honest thing in any room it appeared in. She stood on her toes and kissed him, and he put his arms around her in the middle of her flour-covered bakery and held her with the specific deliberateness of a man who has learned, at significant cost and with significant lateness, that the things worth holding are not the ones you keep at a careful distance. Outside, the city continued. The January elevator was 6 months behind them, the hallway on the 6th floor, the warehouse in the Port District, the corner office in the Halcyon building, all of it behind them, all of it paid for, none of it forgotten. Dante Moretti had built an empire on the principle that love was the thing that made a man weak. He stood in a small bakery on West 34th, with flour on the knees of his suit, and a woman in his arms who had walked into his elevator and refused to be afraid of him. And he understood, with the complete clarity of someone who has tested a belief against reality and found it wrong, that he had been mistaken about almost everything that mattered. Not weak, never weak. Just finally, after a very long time, open.